podcast. The show is called Deals and Deadlines. I'm your friend Matt with my friend Hadley Engelhard, who we refer to as our super agent to the stars. Hadley joins Chuck and Chernoff on Wednesdays. He's always given us some really cool insight. We love having Hadley on for one reason. He's the guy on the other side of the table that we talk about making these deals, that as sports fans and what we do, we're always fascinated how these deals get done. So we thought, why don't we expand that by starting a brand new show, a podcast that we could get to the bottom of, Deals and Deadlines, the art of the sports deal. The goal of the show is to get Hadley's insights, also have some of these folks who make these deals, some of the folks who cover the business of sports to give us their insight on exactly what happens. So that's what's going to happen today. We have a busy show. We're going to have Alex Anthopoulos, Braves GM, joining us today, but we're going to not really talk so much about the inside of like Braves players. It's more going to be about his job. How do you get the job? How do you deal with guys like this? Talking about Hadley. And then we'll have Joe Pompliano on Cover Sports Business to get an idea of some of the big business stories around sports. So Hadley, for those who don't know you, this is where you get to brag on yourself. You get to do some of the bona fides. Tell us a little bit about the background.
Yeah, so I've been doing this for 33 years, representing professional athletes from pro football, basketball, baseball, softball, WWF, you name it, I've done it. And, love being on the air with you on a weekly basis and, excited about sharing my years of experience and people that I know in this business about really what happens, behind the scenes and how things are affected, not just as a fan, but on the business side of things. And so, eager for this podcast and excited about it.
So before we get into some specifics about things going on, tell me about how somebody even gets into this, right? Somebody's listening who's like, my athletic days are done. I can't get on that side. I'm interested in representing athletes or media personalities. How does one even go about it?
Yeah, well, obviously things have changed, in the last 30 years. I call myself a pre-Jerry Maguire kid. And so, when I got to the business, it was pre-internet, it was pre-social media. And so it was more difficult to get into. Now it's much easier to get into. And everyone thinks that because it's sports and entertainment, it's sexy. And even in your side of the business, everyone thinks it's the sexy part of it. They only see.
Look at this. How could this not be sexy? Look at this.
But, listen, this. There's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes that isn't as sexy. It's still a job. You still have got to work with, in our case, we're representing athletes and coaches and executives and advising them. And I have a legal background. So it's important that, you handle all these things very professionally. And, when there is some glamorous things, we enjoy it, as you do as well. But, breaking into the business isn't as easy as you think it is. Everybody wants to be in the business. I'm sure everyone wants to be on the radio. And so it's something that you've got to really grind and network and find your niche in how you go ahead and get into this business. And I advise young people in this business every single day on how to break into it. And hopefully even this will, inspire some people to get into this business.
So talk to me about that. So if I'm somebody who wants to do what you do, obviously I've got to build a client base, right? And it's recruiting like any other form of life. But in this case, you're recruiting college-age athletes. You're recruiting professional-age people who have already had an agent or in the process of looking for somebody new. So I imagine it is selling yourself, selling the dream, selling the idea of you really know how to go get them this deal. So what is the process like?
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's the the million-dollar question. Is how do you break into the business and then how do you stay into this business? And, it is about relationships. It's about your credentials. It's about building a portfolio and doing right by your clients. We've been a mid-sized firm, pretty powerful firm, but purposely we haven't, been acquired by the bigger firms because we wanted that personal touch. I think that's the exception, not the rule anymore. But, it's something that if I knew what the magic button was to recruit and sign, I'd be very happy about that. But, there's no right or wrong answer. But it's something that you've got to really spend the time and grind. And that's really what we say. It's about the grind every day.
So here's one thing I want to get into. I've heard about client stealing. Right?
No.
I know. I've heard some agents are always, regardless, you have a signed agreement with somebody, they're always pitching and they're always offering. So how much do you have to fight off others? How confident and comfortable you are? You have a contract with somebody, but like any business relationship, the client can end that essentially at any time.
100%. And it happens, unfortunately. I've been on both sides of it. And it's something that, you deal with poachers all the time. And, even though you have a contract, you're protected for that length of that term of that contract you've negotiated, but they can fire you at any point. I've had former employees branch off on their own and take clients away, some ethically, some unethically. But it's part of the business, and it's something that if you're in this long enough, people ask all the time, have you been fired before? If you say no, then you haven't been in this business long enough. Yep. So, listen, we're in the business of representing athletes and understand the framework and understand that, there are highs, but there are lows, and you've got to stay even keeled throughout this whole process.
All right, I want to ask you about one thing going on right now. As we record this, we're 5 or 6 days away from the NFL trade deadline, which it's been a big change in the NFL trade deadline. When it used to be a shock that we would get a trade, now we're not even surprised when we get trades a week or two before, as we've seen some of the deals roll in. And then I imagine, because always deadlines, spur action, that we're going to get some more before the deadline. How much is the agent involved? And I don't mean in the wheeling and dealing, but sometimes it's about contract restructures, making sure things fit. So how much are you sort of in the know of what's going on with a client leading up to the deadline?
Yeah, in fact, I had a call yesterday about a potential trade with a client of mine. And, the only time an agent gets involved, at least in the NFL, we're talking about, is when there's a contract matter. Are you entering the last year of your contract? Does the new team potentially want to restructure the deal? Do they want to do an extension? There's so many different ways that this could play out. So at that point, we get involved. Also, some teams want to make sure, in fact, the call that I had yesterday was, would this player be interested in going to this type of team because they really like this player? And, it's from a winning team to a losing team. And, so they really sometimes care about the player. I'd say that's probably the exception. But in this case, they do. And we get involved to some degree. But again, it's all about dollars and cents, right? It's about the deals and the deadlines.
Right.
And so, that's where our true involvement comes in on this.
So the other side of it, though, with the client, I imagine you play therapist at some points, too, when a player hears his name in rumors. And they all say they don't listen or pay attention. It's hard to avoid the news cycle. So when that happens, what are you doing either to calm the client's nerves or saying, yeah, it might happen, be on alert?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we try to get ahead of the news because you're exactly right. I mean, listen, people post stuff. People want to be the first one to release something, right? Everyone wants to be the first. So if it gets out there, it's, and they hear it not from you or from the team, they get offended by it. So we try to get ahead of it. And, the teams also understand that as well, because again, you're dealing with humans and you're dealing with personalities, you're dealing with emotions. So you always want to get ahead of it, whether it's a trade, whether it's a new deal, whether someone may be getting cut, whatever it may be, you always want to emotionally. And that's, we'll talk about this, that all the different hats that someone in the agent management business wears, because, you're dealing with emotions all the time. And so it's important that you're there and you're forthright with your clients.
So we will talk to Alex Anthopoulos later on in this episode. And I want to get to sort of the back and forth of the agent contract negotiator dialogue, because I want to find out what you two have had good experiences and bad. So we'll talk to Alex about that. Coming up, Joe Pompliano, one of the best sports business reporters, I think, in the industry, will talk to us about Shohei Ohtani, this World Series with the Yankees and Dodgers, which has been a huge success at the box office. And Tom Brady is now a business owner, in this case, an NFL owner. We'll find out what that means for Brady coming up. All right, as we continue deals and deadlines, we told you we want to bring some of the people in who cover this and do it very well, because the goal is to make it hopefully a little bit smarter for you guys. Let's welcome in Joe Pompliano, sports business journalist, also has the Huddle Up newsletter. He's great on social media. So many great stories and things I think you get from Joe, and he's kind enough to join us here on Deals and Deadlines. Joe, we appreciate the time. How are you?
Golf clap.
Of course, I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me, guys.
We're glad to have you. So there's a ton going on. Let's start with the World Series. And I was curious, as we record this, so the Yankees have won Game 4 to keep the series going. We know the networks and the game itself love the fact that we're going to get a fifth or a sixth game. Is there a number, though, if you had to guess what it means that we could get an extra game or two? What does that mean to the bottom line from TV networks and beyond?
Yeah, the extra games are super important. The rule of thumb is generally if it's a sweep in the World Series, the networks are breaking even, maybe like making a little bit more money. But now that we have at least a fifth game and potentially a sixth or a seventh game, they're going to make significantly more money than they would have off of a sweep. Now, if we want to break it down on a per game basis, the fifth game is probably worth an additional, $40 to $50 million given the ad rates and how many that are running per game. But that number escalates if it goes to a sixth or a seventh game because they'll be able to charge more because there will be more viewers given the stakes at hand.
Yeah, Joe, and I would think also the fact that we have the Dodgers at the Yankees, obviously escalates that number even more because of their vast fan base and, the East Coast, West Coast matchup.
Yeah, the viewership numbers so far have been tremendous, especially for a sport like baseball that's been seeing a declining number mostly of the last decade. We're seeing numbers that we haven't seen since really the Chicago Cubs series a number of years ago. And I think a large part of that is, sure, you have New York versus LA, two preeminent franchises, the most valuable franchises in baseball. That's a great storyline. But you also have Ohtani versus Judge, the two most famous players in the league, and then a whole host of other players that are incredibly popular too, whether you want to look at Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Giancarlo Stanton, all these other guys too. It adds to the storyline. I think Fox has to be really happy with the outcome.
So as you mentioned, right, the Ohtani part of this becomes the biggest part. I'm not discounting Judge, but globally, this is the perfect storm for baseball beyond just these two teams and their brands. How do we quantify Ohtani's value to the game and to this World Series globally?
Oh, it's tremendous. The fact that he ended up in LA was already a huge win for MLB, just given the market size and the exposure that he's going to get there. You think about it, he was in LA beforehand, but he's become significantly bigger just going across town to the Dodgers versus the Angels. So that's been tremendous for Major League Baseball at a global scale. And then if you think about dollars and cents, viewership in Japan is currently on pace to potentially outpace viewership in America for the World Series. That would have been unheard of and unthought of. And some people will say that's a bad thing for baseball, but I wouldn't. I think it's tremendous for baseball, the fact that they're now attracting a global audience, and most of that is probably attributed to Ohtani, with a smaller percentage that may be attributed to Yamamoto.
Could you parlay this into something, though? Is this a one-off because it is the perfect storm of those teams and that star power, or can baseball now parlay this into something moving forward?
Well, they already are. I think the Dodgers are scheduled to open their season next year in Japan. Japan is a country that loves baseball, and they've shown that over the years, whether it's the World Baseball Classic or other things across Major League Baseball. And I think what we're seeing is Ohtani and other players like Yamamoto are just supercharging that to a degree. So, yeah, baseball will do things like one-off international series that they've been doing in London and other places like Japan. But it's really, can you translate these people to watching games full-time on television? Because then you start talking about monetizing the international viewership rights to a higher degree. You start attracting more sponsors outside of just Japanese sponsors for the Dodgers and other things like that, which can be incredibly valuable to Major League Baseball's bottom line.
Yeah, let me add to that, by the way. A big market in Japan is actually softball. And, we've had players we've represented play over there, and they're treated like gods and pay them very, very well. And so the Japanese sports market is huge. And obviously having Ohtani is taking it to another level. And I'll add one more thing. Even this Juan Soto story, that's part of this, right? They rented him for 1 year, potentially. And words are that he could end up with the Dodgers next year, potentially. So I think that also plays into this great story of Dodgers versus Yankees.
Yeah, I think the Dodgers have been incredibly smart about how they built that team. They've obviously spent a ton of money like the Yankees and like the Mets. But if you think about Ohtani, the way they structured that deal, it's going to pay off tenfold relative to the time value of money that they're paying him today versus what that $700 million contract is going to be worth in the future. We talked a little bit about sponsorships. They signed, I think it was like 15 new Japanese sponsors this year. In fact, they ran out of inventory so fast that Japanese brands were buying inventory in other MLB stadiums for Ohtani away games, right? So they literally didn't have enough inventory to go out and sell. And the viewership is another thing as well, merchandise, all of that stuff. And other MLB owners benefit from this too because of the revenue sharing covenant. So it's something that not only the Dodgers were smart and intelligent to do, but all the other owners are benefiting from as well.
Do you think they're going to follow that lead, though? Because when they started doing the deferrals, and obviously the Ohtani contract got the biggest amount of attention, there were some that were upset, but the Dodgers didn't do anything wrong. They're using and going with the system, and players are agreeing to it. Do you see other teams maybe following that?
Potentially. I mean, it's all a mathematical equation at this point, right? I think really what that was, if I'm being honest, was I think Ohtani and his agent probably wanted to sign the largest deal in MLB history by a mile and reach that $700 million number. And the reason for that is if you look at it and you calculate it based on the time value of money, it's really a $460 million deal, which is how Major League Baseball is calculating it for the salary cap purposes. So at the end of the day, if you want a big number, sure, push some of that money out into the future. Ohtani obviously doesn't need the money today, so he's comfortable in doing that. But it's another reason why I don't think Juan Soto is going to get anywhere close to that number. Now, he may get 500, 600, something huge and astronomical, which is what everyone is expecting. But he's not going to get 700 because he doesn't bring that same international appeal as someone like Ohtani.
Yeah, let me add to that. I think, the Ohtani deal is the exception, not the rule. I mean, I think he's about building the brand. He understands it. He's making so much money internationally that it was beneficial to him to do this. Do I see other players and that becoming the new framework? I doubt it. Could it happen a one-off again? Sure. But I think a Juan Soto, just like Joe said, is going to end up being in that $500 million, what he deserves to be paid. And but again, the net number for Ohtani is in that same range anyway, so it really benefits everybody.
Joe, let me ask you about, I saw you guys had written about Tom Brady now with his partial ownership in the Raiders. It's a $220 million investment. And what we were curious about, if he was to sell one day, yes, he gets the percentage of whatever the value would increase at that point. Is he allowed to sell before Mark Davis decided if he ever wanted to move the Raiders? And what does that $220 million investment get you beyond just the value of the franchise?
Yeah, so the Tom Brady deal is super interesting to me because it underlies, it showcases some of the numbers behind these sports franchises, right? When people think about a sports franchise, let's just say the sports team is worth $1 billion, and they see someone buys a 10% stake in the team. Many people would just speculate that that person paid $100 million to buy 10% of the team. But typically how it works is an investor receives a 20 to 30% discount on those shares, meaning they're going to buy them for $70 to $80 million rather than $100. And the reason behind that is twofold. Number one, there's no liquidity. So unlike the stock market, they just can't go out and sell those shares on the open market very fast. It takes time. It has to be approved. You have to find a buyer, et cetera. But the second thing, and it goes back to your point, is you don't really get anything, right? You're not making any team decisions. You're not making any business decisions for the team. In most cases, all you're really getting is to attend games. And that's cool. Maybe you get a little behind-the-scenes access. You get to brag to your friends and stuff like that. But that's an expensive way to be able to do that. So that's why they get the discount. And Tom Brady's in a little bit unique of a position because he actually got a much larger discount than most people would. He got more than a 50% discount on his shares. And the reason for that is because he's Tom Brady, but also the expectation within the Raiders is that he's going to do more than a typical limited partner would do. That might include things like helping them scout and select a quarterback in the upcoming draft. And Mark Davis has even hinted at the fact that he may ask Tom Brady to help train the quarterback. So there's obviously a little bit of stuff there that you can't really put a price on, which is my guess as to why Mark Davis ended up selling the shares at such a discounted price when he could have went out in the market and there's no shortage of people and funds that would have bought those shares at a higher premium.
Yeah, let me, obviously, if another billionaire invested in the team, we wouldn't be talking about it like we are now.
Yep.
And, even one of the perks, Joe, that you mentioned about, going to the games, Tom can't even do that, right? Because he's doing network, on other games. So I think it's more the cachet of having Tom Brady be part of this. But I also think Tom is a smart businessman. I think he understands that this is how he gets his foot in the door for true ownership. And I'd bet on Tom owning a team outright with a group of people and him being the face of the franchise down the road, whether it's the Raiders, if the Davis family ever decides to sell, or it's another team. And I just think he's about diversifying his portfolio and using what he's developed, not only as a Super Bowl winner, but just an iconic figure in sports.
Yeah.
Well, it's a really interesting point because there's a lot to unpack there, right? If you think about Brady, he owns 10% of the team now, call it give or take, depending on how they split it up with his other partner. But that could eventually increase to a larger number, or maybe at one point Mark Davis just says, hey, screw the broadcasting stuff. We want you to run the team. Right? And that's a pretty substantial role that would take up a lot of his time, and maybe it's something that interests him. But this is also a model that we're seeing other athletes employ. If you look at LeBron James, he's been very vocal about his desire to own a basketball team, an expansion team specifically in Las Vegas. Now, these teams are going to be worth, $5 or $6 billion when you talk about expansion fees. He obviously can't afford that, even though he's made an incredible amount of money. So he has to go out and partner with someone else, which is going to be Fenway Sports Group, who he's been working with for more than a decade and acquiring acquiring shares in other teams like Liverpool and now all the other assets they own. And my guess is he's going to do the same structure, which is, hey, put in a little bit of money here. You're going to own, however many percentage points in the team. But more importantly, you're going to be the face of the franchise. And you're going to run the team, and we're going to use your name, image, and likeness to drive value for all of us. So it's sort of a win-win for LeBron, but also Fenway Sports Group, because they're going to make a lot more money with him than they would with someone else.
Amen.
Joe, last thing for you. As the NBA season began, we're seeing this continued uptick in load management and players telling you and teams telling you before games, my star's not playing back-to-back. And I saw the story about TNT's ratings for the season opener was fine, but they saw a decline without some of the star players playing. We have these new contracts to look forward to, the new NBA TV deal. What, if anything, can they do to limit some of the star sitting out games? Because that essentially hurts in arena, but it also hurts the TNT Thursday night or Monday night if I know I'm not getting Joel Embiid or if I'm not getting Anthony Davis. What can they do about that?
For sure. I actually think it's a much bigger problem than people realize. This is something I've been talking about for several years now. If you start to track NBA viewership over the years, it's obviously down significantly from the late 90s and things like that. But even over the last few years, it hasn't been really great. And part of this is because they play so many games. There's so much stuff to follow. But the NBA is an international game, whereas that same problem in Major League Baseball is much more difficult to solve because they don't have as many fans internationally. Now, basketball has tried to do a few things, and Adam Silver have tried to do a few things to solve this. But ultimately, I don't think they're going to be in a rush to solve it because they just signed this massive media rights deal that no one thought they could get, including me, right? And I think a huge part of that was just the fact that you're in this environment now where cable companies are having to bid higher and higher and higher for these rights because they can't lose them because they're the only thing keeping the business alive. But then on the other side of the demand equation, you have these tech companies like an Amazon who are strapped with cash and driving the rights even higher and higher. So the NBA lucked out with the timing of this. I think we're probably in store for another huge NFL deal towards the end of this decade when they can opt out of their agreement. But after that, no one really knows, which is something I wrote a little bit about this morning of like team valuations. You're going to have to get a little bit more complex over the coming years and figure out how to drive valuations higher without counting on media rights.
Joe Pompliano is a great follow on social media. If you're into the sports business stuff, he does a phenomenal job. The Huddle Up newsletter, you can see a link to that on his social media on Twitter. And I know there's a podcast, I'm sure, because everybody wants a good podcast. Where can they hear yours, Joe?
Yeah, thanks, guys. The podcast is The Joe Pomp Show. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube.
Love it. Joe, thank you so much for the insight. We'd love to have you back on later on, and we appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thanks again to Joe Pompliano. We appreciate his insight. We're going to bring you some of those guys who cover the sports business world week in and week out here on the podcast. All right, coming up, the general manager of the Atlanta Braves, Alex Anthopoulos. Not so much to talk about his players, but the background. How do you become a GM in sports? What's it like dealing with these pushy agents? And we'll get the business behind doing what he does next. All right, as we continue the inaugural episode here, that's a tough word to say, of deals and deadlines.
Can you spell it?
I don't want to have to spell it. I was told there'd be no spelling on the show. Let's bring in a guy that I know our community and just the sports community very aware of and love the job he does. It's Braves General Manager and Vice President Alex Anthopoulos, who's kind enough to join us to talk a little bit about sort of the other side of what Hadley does. Alex, we always appreciate your time. How are you?
Really glad to be on, guys. Appreciate it.
So here's where I want to start. And I know this is kind of, open-ended. How does one become a general manager in baseball? Because it seems to me the old days was scouting, kind of make your hay that way. But it feels like it's sort of changed. We have guys not putting in the 20 years like they used to on the road. So how does one get to that position today?
Yeah, I always say, obviously with my title, how did you get there? But I look at it more at the infancy stages. How do you get into sports, right? Just getting into sports is hard enough. And I've always told people, unless you know the owner, you pretty much, getting into sports, you don't apply, right? You do, but it's likely going to be an internship. And, some entry-level position, that's, I'd say 99% of the people that are in sports, they have a story. And I always basically, when you talk to someone, say, tell me your story, because it wasn't just, hey, there was an ad, I applied, I got in, and that was the end of it. There's normally some type of path. Now, obviously getting to director level, assistant GM, whatever it might be, manager, coach, that normally you just work your way through. But look, I can tell you from my standpoint, I loved scouting. I still love scouting. It's still a part of the game I enjoy the most. It just doesn't necessarily work out with my job responsibilities currently. But you get in. I never thought about being a GM. When you're a fan, yeah, sure, you want to be a GM. Once you realize how hard it is to get into sports, just getting in, I was satisfied. I'm working in sports. I'm doing something I love each day. I'm not going to look ahead. I'm just going to dominate whatever they give me, whether that's, going to get lunch, whether that's doing magnets on a draft board. Whatever they give me, I'm going to try to excel at it, have a good attitude, have humility, be a good teammate. And over time, hopefully opportunities present themselves and it takes care of itself. But I've said this as well, it's certainly changed. I don't believe I'd get into sports today with the level of talent and brains, at least from a Major League Baseball standpoint. I can't speak for the others, but the group that we have is so exceptionally talented. And I'm not trying to be, this isn't false humility. They're way smarter than I am. Their credentials are way better than mine. And so I don't think I'd even have a chance. I'm grateful I got in when I did, and I'm very grateful people gave me the opportunities.
Yeah, Alex, I say the same thing always about being on the agent side of it, is that, you wish you always have a first-round draft choice, and that's your goal, and be on national TV and, do the big deals, but you have to put in the grind. And I believe, actually, the scouting way is the way to become a general manager in any sport, because I think you really understand what it takes to build a team, what you're looking for, and then you learn the other skill sets as you come along. But I applaud your path, and obviously, being the general manager of the Atlanta Braves and the job that you've done is I bow down to you. You've done a great job.
No, I certainly appreciate that. And yeah, obviously I'm biased. Came from a scouting background. I worked in amateur scouting for a long time, got to do an area. I love it. I love evaluating players. If you told me what do I enjoy the most, getting to go to Latin America, see some players, getting to go to a high school game, getting to go to a college players game and break players down, watch video. I just enjoy it. I love being able to break it down. I do think there are advantages that come to that. Of course, we have tons of data and information and really great stuff that's great to blend. But it's an exact science, right? And it was just all algorithms and data. Everyone will be looking at the same players. There is the other components, the other piece to it. And I think it's critically important, no doubt about it. And, it's something that I will value, and I understand it's because of my upbringing.
So let me ask you this, just to follow up with that. I mean, obviously your job description now doesn't entail daily scouting and stuff, and you may look at some stuff. Have you, on an off day, ventured to a high school or travel ball here in Metro Atlanta just to kind of go old school and just kind of get a sneak peek at some future talent?
Yeah, my brain is scouting, right? I just like it. I'm really passionate. I enjoy it. I don't know how to scout other sports, but I try in my own way. And if I can, so if I'm in spring training and it makes sense and I can just go pop out and see someone, I'm very careful to not do it for the draft because I've seen a lot of mistakes made. GM rolls in, sees one or two players, gets a bad look or a great look, and pulls rank in the draft room, and that's just not good for anybody, right? So you make a lot of mistakes. You have all these people spending hours and hours and hours, and you're going to go in and one look a player, good or bad, and pull rank. So sometimes, I'll be told, hey, so-and-so's playing down the street, and I might say, look, I don't want to influence the decision because as much as I'm telling myself I don't want to, if I see something, it's hard to shake it when I'm in the draft room. But if there's a chance to see players, I will. I mean, and even if it's the off season and there's other sports, if I'm watching a game on TV, I'm trying to break a guy down, evaluate him. I mean, God, there was an off day, not an off day, it was the off season, I don't know, whenever John Morant was drafted, he was playing somewhere in Alabama, and whatever, it was the wintertime, and got in the car and drove 2 hours to go see him play. Because I watched video. I was like, this guy's ridiculous. Like, the athleticism, the twitch, the body control, all of it, right? It wasn't great level of competition, but he's playing somewhere in Alabama, and I don't know, I think it was a year or two that I was here, so I had some people like, oh, Braves GM, what are you doing here? Look, when I was with the Dodgers, the same way. We were in spring training. Lonzo Ball was coming out of the draft. UCLA was playing in Arizona. You have stuff during the day. We had an opening at night, and me and the GM at the time, Florence Ziti, we went. He loves hoops too, and we went to go see him play. And I'm looking for body language. I'm looking for just the little things, and I'm looking for things that from an athletic standpoint that I would just try to incorporate from a baseball standpoint. So I don't know what I'm doing in the other sports. I think I do a little bit on the baseball side of things, but I love doing it. And the same thing if I go watch an NFL game with my son, I'm trying to look for things, but I would love to sit down with an NFL or NBA scout and learn from them just to see what the key things are, because that stuff is fun.
We can make that happen, Alex.
Yes, there's ways we can pull that off. Alex, let me ask you about the art of making a deal. And I joke with Hadley all the time that we get to hear his perspective from the other side of the table. I think the fan is fascinated with the idea of where the conversation begins. There's a free agent. There's somebody you're looking at. You put a text in, a call to the agent. Tell me how the dialogue begins. And have you ever had some that have just gone perfect and you got the deal done quickly, or the agent, the representation who's been difficult, that made the task a little bit harder?
Yeah, you know what? I don't view it as someone being difficult, because people could say that's on the other side. The same way, I've just never viewed the world that way. Again, I'm speaking for myself, so I'm not trying to offend anybody. I just think it's arrogant for me, for example, to have a position of, this GM's tough to make a trade with. This agent, well, maybe they're saying the same thing about me, or is it because I'm not getting what I want, or I don't like the way it's not going on my terms? I have an issue with it. So I just think you have to be respectful across the board. Everyone always has the ability to say no, right? If I put my house up for sale and you don't like the price, don't make an offer. You can't get mad at me, right? And it's the same way. So I think, getting reactionary, getting emotional, I just don't see the upside to that. Look, if someone is saying something disrespectfully or something, that's a separate issue, right? There's a certain way to carry yourself and deal with someone, but that goes beyond work and business. That's just in life, right? Whether you go out to dinner, whether you're dealing with someone. So I do think you learn over time. I think something I've gotten better at is, as a young GM, I'm chasing everybody, right? I'm just weak. There's no one that is unattainable. There's no player that, I need someone to say no. There's no, and then I think over time you get shut out a little bit. You learn, how can I manage my time more effectively, more efficiently? And that's not to say it's a defeatist attitude by any stretch. It's just being more realistic of, who do you really realistically have a chance at? Let's say there's a player with strong ties to Arizona, and Arizona spring training, family person, kids in school, really important for them to be Arizona spring training. I might put in a phone call, but I also know it's a long shot for obvious reasons. And I remember talking to Mark DeRosa about Brian McCann when Mark DeRosa was in Toronto, and he was going to be a free agent. I'm like, and he was telling me how much he loves him and he's his best friend and he was a great player. I'm like, you think Mark DeRosa would ever, come to Toronto? He's like, you can give him $200 million. He's not coming. And that's fine. And it's not a personal thing, and I respect that. Roy Halladay, the late Roy Halladay, told me, and I agree with him, is, for him, free agency is about choosing where you want to play. Now, part of that choice is financially too, but ultimately he felt the decision of where you wanted to play. So I just think now I have a better handle on what's realistic, because the issue is, same way at the trade deadline, you start allocating a ton of time and getting laser focused on something that's probably not going to reap any rewards. You're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities, and you're on the clock, right? Once the bell starts, you're on the clock. Now, your own player who's under contract, who's not going anywhere, yeah, you can have conversations over months, and that's fine. But when you're getting into free agency or trades, I think you've got to be smart with your time, especially when you've got some form of a deadline one way or the other. We do want to try to get things done by spring training, of course, and trade deadline, you have a date and a time you need to get things done. So you do have to manage your time and be smart with it, and also other things will come off the board. And I think that's just something I've needed to learn over time and get burned a little bit. And it's not to say that we're closed-minded, but I think my instincts and my feel has gotten better with experience of what's more realistic, what isn't, and what do we really need to spend time on.
Are you more old school? You like the phone? Do you do a text? How does the offer eventually get to the point where you put numbers out? Is it an interest in the player to see if there's an interest in the team? What's the timeline like involved in that?
I think it all depends. Some people, I'm a phone guy. I just don't like the potential of someone taking a text the wrong way. You don't have tone, things like that. So, look, there's times if there's a quick question, that could be text. Email is normally with an agreement letter and things like that. But, text is fine. But if there's something that needs to be discussed, I'm not personally a fan of text. I've seen it in all areas of life, texts are misrepresented. Tonal. What did this mean? What did that mean? Well, if you just got on the phone and you heard the tone of the voice and what was said, you would understand. Obviously words have real meaning. So, but look, if there's a quick question, we were trying to line up a meeting with a player, you need to coordinate something, things like that. But if there's something that there needs to be discussed, I just think it's easier to do it over the phone. And look, I'd say this too, again, with experience and time, I think you just cut to the chase more, and I don't know if I'm 47, and I don't think I'm that old, but I don't want to say I'm kind of old and cranky by any stretch, but I think I can fast forward through steps 1 through 8 and get to 9 and 10 pretty quickly. And maybe as a young executive, you just really go nice and slow and one at a time. And I think it's also having respect for the other side. I don't think you need to waste anyone's time. And I think you can basically frame things on both sides. And I think having respect for the other side and the job they have to do and the position they're in, and trying to understand and weigh what they're dealing with, I think is important too. I think, look, above all this stuff with deals, for me, again, speaking for myself, trust. Trust is paramount, whether it's with other GMs, whether it's with agents. If there's trust on the other side, and I understand everyone's trying to make a deal, that will ultimately benefit their side, but if there's trust, I think you've got a chance to get a deal done. If there isn't, there's always going to be, I think, some start-stop, some apprehension, and so on. And I think your reputation is important. I think the way you carry yourself, you handle yourself, is important. And if you're taking the long view that, hey, I expect and hope to be doing this a long time, I expect and hope to be dealing with these individuals more than once, and knowing that trust piece is critically important. I think if you just let that guide you, and it doesn't mean you're going to agree, and it's fine if you don't agree, right? It doesn't mean you're going to get a deal done. That's fine too. But I do think that helps move things along.
Yeah, let me add to that. I mean, on the agent side of it, it's, people talk about how the negotiations go. And the reality of it is, and Alex, I know you'll agree with this, it has to be a win-win. And, the player has to win and the franchise has to win. So, we have a meeting of the minds. And, what agents tend to do is we forget that, Alex and people in his position have to manage an entire roster, manage an entire salary cap. I'm only concerned about a particular player. And so when you understand that they have to manage it, and I think Alex said it perfectly, I mean, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And, there's other suitors potentially, and you can go elsewhere. And you have to weigh all these different variables into doing a deal, not just the financial part of it, but family, where you're from, who you want to play for, all the different makeups, no matter whether it's baseball, football, or basketball, all these factors come into play. I mean, we even look at what city it's in, what state it's in for tax purposes. I mean, so you really have to delve into all these different factors and make it a win-win situation. And Alex, you said something that I believe in is, I'm a big old school phone call kind of guy, because I think you're right. Today's generation is all about texting, and I think things get lost in the interpretation and the meaning behind it. And I think a conversation goes a lot longer. And when it's minor things, yes, a text can, save time. But when you're really getting down to it, phone calls or in-person meetings really what makes it happen.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, like you said, of course, players should always look to get what they're worth, maximize, and so on. And the flip side of it is the club has to build a roster. And I never worked in the NBA, but it feels as though one player in the NBA can really carry a team. And that in baseball, that's not the case. So you have to be careful of. You can have the one superstar player, and in theory, you could pay anybody anything you want. But what are you going to surround them with? So you could. And I think that's ultimately, that's not the player's issue, right? At the end of the day, the market value is the market value. And, can the club get close to that? And does it make sense? And does it still allow them to build a competitive team? Because, yes, of course, if we have great players on the field, fans want to come out. But beyond all that, they want to come out and see a winning team. So I've always said there's only so much pie to go around, right? And obviously payrolls vary in MLB, and then obviously teams that don't have caps. But that you have to we have to field 26. We can't field 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. So whether we want to or not, 26 players have to be on the roster. You've got a payroll. You've got to try to fit it all in, and you've got to balance that. And the player might be worth X, and if ultimately getting that player at those dollars doesn't allow you to fill the other parts of the team, look, we've seen that in town with other teams, right? Individual players, you heard salary cap hell and all this kind of stuff. That's not to take away from the players, but trying to manage all those things and put a winning team. So that's the art of it, and that's a way to try to find a way to get it done. And I think as long as everyone's transparent and you understand, I think every side does. Look, if we can't be competitive for a player because we know their market value is X, and we just know, hey, we're not going to be able to spend to that level for that position for the coming year, we'll just be honest about it. We don't need to lowball or make it we can have an honest conversation. We know, the information's out there for everybody to see. I think just being transparent, being honest, and we move forward. If there's a way to do it, you try. If there's a way you can get close, you try. And then, the player's got a decision to make. But there's full transparency. So, look, it's hard. It's hard to sign players. It's hard to make trades. It's a grind, and at the end of the day, if you get more wrong than right, you're not on the phone now. And if you can get more right than wrong, you get to stay in the chair for a little bit.
Yeah. Alex, before we let you go, two quick things. We were talking earlier to a sports business reporter about the Shohei deal with the Dodgers, and I asked him, will more clubs use the deferral as an opportunity to kind of work around some salary stuff? Is that something the Braves would ever consider?
Oh, I don't, we haven't done any deferrals, but, my understanding, talking to Terry McGurk, so the chairman and control person, I think everything would always, we'd always be open to everything. We wouldn't limit ourselves in any way. I think you evaluate every deal and every transaction on its own merits. So, look, for the Dodgers, I was there for 2 years. There's a lot of their contracts. They do have significant for some in Shohei and others, just some deferrals in their contracts. That's something that they've done. We have some other clubs and some other owners that don't do them, right? So I think that's where the business side comes in, and CFOs and owners, what they ultimately want to do. My view is, whatever I'm given payroll-wise, parameters to work with, policies, things like that, we got to get it done. There's no one wants to hear any excuses. It's not. That's not to say it in any other way, but I think you can get things done. There's a million ways to make deals. There's a million different contract structures and so on. And like was said before, if it's a win-win for both sides, deals get done.
Yeah, well, you talk about the Dodgers have done deferrals. I think one of the things you guys have done well, and as an agent, you hope that other teams do it, is take care of your own and been aggressive in signing guys pre-arbitration to long-term deals. That being said, do you think more teams are going to follow what you guys have done with your young core and follow that?
Yeah, it's tough to say, right? It's team specific, it's player specific. Look, in a perfect world, we would wait, right? We'd get more information. You have these guys for 6 years, and you would wait and get to know their makeup that much better, get a better handle on their health, get to see how they develop as players. But ultimately, as we know, you get closer to free agency, it's harder, right? They're that much closer, it's more challenging, so on. So we were much more aggressive in signing players earlier than we would like, but we did that knowing that that's the risk. It's the risk of having cost certainty, knowing that they're going to be here, knowing we can build around them, knowing at the same time, look, no one plans on having a bad year, no one plans on being hurt, but we all know those things do happen. So that's the risk reward for both sides, and sharing risk, that you get guarantee, you get security, and that the club also gets to know that you're going to be here, and the fan base gets to know you're going to be here. And what's tough in my chair is, you have a guy and, you have him for so many years and they're really good players, and then all of a sudden they're going to leave as free agents, and now, we need to trade them. And now you're trading them, you have them for 6 years, you want to get proper trade value. Well, we can't do it with a year left. Probably need to do it with 2 to 3 years left. So now you're sitting there and you're enjoying a really good Atlanta Braves player for 3 years, and then they're gone because you need to constantly churn and replenish. And I think that affects the fan base, that affects the community. And that doesn't mean you're just going to sign all of your players. But I do think there's a trade-off in that too, though. So I think stability, continuity, as long as you pick the right guys, the right work ethic and so on, I think is a good thing. But with that comes injuries at the same time and drop in performance.
Alex, last thing. I've always marveled at your ability as a franchise to keep everything under wraps in a world where there are no secrets. So on your end, I know how you do it. How do you, I don't know if the best word is, how do you trust the other side, the agent or the other team, not to leak it, not to put it out there because you are better served to not have anybody know the business?
Yeah, I think, and I'm proud of the fact that for the most part, we've had a reputation that things don't get out, and I think that's an advantage. I think people like dealing with us in that respect, whether it's agents, players, teams. So knowing that if there is a leak, based on past experience, not to be arrogant about this, but it's probably going to look like it's coming from the other side. We just try to say, look, this is important to us to keep quiet, and look, the agent will say the same thing, and the team will say the same thing, but sometimes, depending how big their inner circles are, whether that's a player, player telling family and their friends, and there's always someone that you can't tell anybody but, right? Like, as much as you're telling someone you can't tell anybody, then they go to the next person and say you can't tell anybody. So look, from our end, I take care of that the only person that knows is Terry McGurk, and literally Terry McGurk at times, that's it. And then senior staff, very small group. And that way, because I think the worst feeling in the world is if there's a leak and then people start to speculate who is it. And that's not fair to the employees. You start being suspicious. Well, was it this person? Was it that person? And it's just not fair to the employees. So if you're keeping your circle that small internally, I'm never going to think poorly of anybody internally because they didn't know. And it can't even cross my mind to suspect or blame them. So I've been here a long time. I know, obviously Terry's the boss, so he's going to know everything that's going on. But we've had success there. Everyone's been great, and I think on the other side, I think they respect the fact. Look, it's to no one's benefit to have things leak when you're having active discussions and so on. Look, there's times that there's leaks for various reasons, but I think when we're trying to get a deal done, whether that's a signing or a trade, I think all parties have been incentivized to keep things quiet.
Alex, it's always a pleasure. Love picking your brain when it comes to the behind-the-scenes part of this. We appreciate you always being so available, and thank you for the time.
Okay, guys.
Thanks, Alex.
Appreciate it.
Thanks again to Alex Anthopoulos, Braves GM and Vice President. Thanks to Joe Pompliano, sports business journalist. And thanks to Hadley Engelhard. Our maiden voyage was a success.
I think so. I enjoyed it and look forward to more in-depth conversations with different people in the sports business about deals and deadlines and, how things happen behind the scenes.
I would tell people search up Deals and Deadlines wherever it is you get your favorite podcast. We're available on all of the above. You'll have this waiting for you in your feed once a week. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks for joining us.